The desert sun was just beginning to rise over the jagged red cliffs of the Arizona Territory, casting long shadows across the open plain. The sky blushed orange and pink, promising another scorcher. Dust hung in the air like smoke. The land was quiet, too quiet. No cattle lowed, no wagon wheels creaked. Just the dry whisper of the wind brushing against brittle grass and splintered fence posts. Tied to one of those posts was a girl. She looked no older than 16. Her name was Clara Bell, though she wouldn't offer it right away. Her wrists were bound with sun-dried rawhide, too tight and already cutting deep. Her face was burned, lips cracked and swollen. Her gingham dress was torn at the shoulder and caked in dirt. Her legs trembled under her, knees buckling, but the rope held her upright like a cruel puppet string. Her father had left her there 2 nights ago. He was a mean, drunk man named Jed Bell, a ranch hand turned gambler, a man who saw women as property and children as burdens. When Clara refused to run off with one of his poker friends, a man twice her age and missing most of his teeth, Jed beat her, threw her in the back of a wagon and dragged her into the hills. With only the stars for witness, he tied her to the old fence post left from a ruined cattle line and rode off without a word. "I'll come back for you," he'd snarled, "if the coyotes don't get you first." The first night had been the worst. Cold wrapped around her like a wet shroud. She screamed until her throat went raw. Coyotes howled in the distance, closer every hour. Her breath came in short, panicked. Bursts, she prayed, then cursed, then prayed again. But morning had come, and she was still alive. The second day was heat and thirst and silence. Her head pounded, her skin burned. She drifted in and out of consciousness. The second night brought silence, save for the occasional screech of an owl or the snap of something unseen in the underbrush. She stopped crying. Her body was too tired. If death came, she was ready to go quietly. But the third morning, this morning was different. The sound reached her ears first. Hooves, steady, not a wild Mustang. A rider, maybe 2. She blinked into the sun, barely able to raise her head. Her vision blurred, sweat and dust mixing in her eyes. A shadow fell across her face. A voice spoke low and firm. "Damn." She squinted. A tall man sat atop a bay gelding, dust on his coat, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He was quiet, still like the desert itself. He dismounted slowly and walked toward her, boots crunching in the dry earth. His name was Elias Boone, a reclusive rancher known only by rumor in the nearby town of Dust Creek. He knelt beside her. "What's your name?" he asked. Clara tried to speak, but her lips barely moved. She could only manage a broken whisper. "Don't touch me." Elias raised his hands and nodded. "All right, I ain't here to hurt you." He scanned her. Bruises on her arms, rope burns, sunburned skin. Her eyes were wild, filled with equal parts terror and defiance. This girl had been through hell, but she hadn't given up. "Not yet. I'm gonna cut you loose, all right?" he said calmly. "Ain't gonna lay a hand on you unless I have to." She didn't answer, but she didn't flinch either. From his saddlebag, Elias pulled a small knife and carefully sliced the rawhide bindings. As soon as the pressure released, Clara collapsed forward. Elias caught her gently before she hit the dirt, cradling her under the arms. She was light, too light, starved, dehydrated. Her breathing was shallow. "I've got a canteen," he muttered, pulling it out. He offered it slowly. Clara stared at it, then took a sip, then another. The water felt like life itself. She gasped and coughed, but didn't stop drinking. "What's your name?" he asked again. She wiped her mouth, wincing. "Clara." "All right, Clara. I'm Elias. We're getting you out of here." He carried her to the horse and, with effort, hoisted her up into the saddle in front of him. She was barely conscious now, head resting against his chest, fingers clutching his coat. He took the reins and clicked his tongue, urging the gelding forward. As they rode, Clara drifted in and out of sleep, but her body stayed tense as if bracing for the next blow. Elias didn't speak much. He just rode, steady and patient toward his ranch nestled between the rocky hills and cottonwood trees some 10 miles off. When they arrived, he helped her down and brought her into the small wooden cabin. It was plain, but clean. A single photograph sat above the fireplace, a woman and child long gone now. Elias said nothing about them. He gave Clara food, warm beans, dry bread, a boiled potato. She ate in silence, flinching at every sound, every creak of the wood. He offered her a blanket and his daughter's old nightgown. She changed behind a closed door. That night, she lay on a cot in the corner, listening to the desert wind through the cracks in the walls. She hadn't said more than a dozen words to the man, but something in his eyes told her he wasn't like her father. Still, she didn't sleep. Not deeply. Not yet. Outside, Elias sat on the porch, sharpening a knife under the stars. He wasn't sure what Clara's story was, but he knew cruelty when he saw it. He'd seen it in the war. He'd seen it in the mirror. And now he'd seen it in the marks left on that girl's arms. Elias Boone wasn't much for praying. But that night, under the cold western sky, he whispered one anyway. The morning sun crept over the hills, painting the dusty plains gold. Inside the modest log cabin, Clara stirred beneath a rough wool blanket. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then the memories came rushing back. Her father's, shouting, the coarse rope biting into her wrists, the night alone under the stars. She sat up quickly, heart pounding, and scanned the room. No one else inside, just the ticking of a mantel clock, the soft creak of wood expanding in the heat, and the faint aroma of bacon and coffee drifting through the open window. She touched her wrists, bandaged now. Her throat still burned, but the hunger wasn't as sharp anymore. The cabin was plain but well kept. A small table with 2 chairs, a shelf of books, a patched rocking chair by the fireplace. A photograph sat on the mantel, an auburn-haired woman with kind eyes and a small girl clutching a rag doll. Clara stared at it a long time. She rose slowly, her legs still sore, and stepped onto the front porch. Elias Boone stood at the far end, coffee in hand, staring out at the land. His broad shoulders were hunched, his hat tipped low to shield his face from the rising sun. He didn't turn when she stepped outside. "Coffee's on the stove," he said simply. Clara hesitated, then nodded and ducked back in. The chipped enamel mug felt warm in her hand. She sipped slowly, wincing at the bitterness, but it made her feel more alive than she had in days. When she returned to the porch, Elias was still silent. After a long stretch of quiet, she spoke first. "This your land?" He gave a small nod. "What's left of it? You got cows or something?" "Used to. Drought took most. Coyotes took some. What's left keep me busy." Another pause. Clara shifted uncomfortably, wrapping the blanket tighter around her. She wasn't used to quiet that didn't feel dangerous. "You live out here all alone?" she asked. He took a sip of coffee. "Some folks say that. Me, I just say I'm left alone." That answer puzzled her. She looked out at the dry fields and cracked earth. "It's awful quiet. Quiet's better than screaming." That made her stiffen. Elias noticed, but said nothing more. Inside the barn that afternoon, Clara found an old wooden brush and began grooming one of the horses. She didn't ask permission. She just needed something to do. The routine, the smell of hay, and dust, the warmth of the mare, it all reminded her of better days, before her father drank himself mean. Elias walked in and leaned on the stall watching. "You know what you're doing," he said. "I used to help Ma, before she passed." He didn't respond, but his eyes softened. After a moment, he handed her an apple for the horse. She took it without a word. That evening, Elias cooked beans and salted pork over the wood stove. Clara ate quietly, still glancing at the photo on the mantel. "You have a daughter?" she asked suddenly. Elias didn't look up. "Had. She, the girl in the picture?" He nodded once. "What happened to her?" He was silent for a long time. The fire cracked softly in the hearth. Finally, he said, "Bandits hit a stagecoach 5 winters ago. My wife and girl were heading to town for Christmas sugar and candles. Got caught in the wrong place. Clara stared into her tin plate, heart aching. I'm sorry. Elias didn't answer. He stood, gathered the dishes, and began washing them in the basin. You don't talk much, she said. I've found talking don't fix what's broken. Clara opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. She understood, more than he knew. That night, the wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. Clara lay awake on the cot, eyes wide open in the dark. Every creak of the cabin made her flinch. Her mind played tricks, hearing footsteps, her father's slurred voice, the snap of a belt. Suddenly she heard a noise from the barn, a low, guttural sob. Quiet, but raw. She slipped from her bed, padded barefoot to the porch, and peered into the night. There, in the barn's open doorway, Elias sat on a crate. A small boot rested in his hand. Worn leather. A child's boot. He stared at it like it was made of glass, and his body shook silently. No words, just pain. Clara didn't call out, didn't interrupt. She backed away, heart full and hollow at once. Inside, she quietly placed a plate of warm cornbread on the table. No note. No big gesture. Just a small kindness. The next morning, Elias found the plate. He didn't say anything, but when Clara came to the porch with her coffee, he had a second cup waiting. He handed it to her without a word. She took it and, for the first time, offered a small smile. Thank you, she said. Elias nodded. We'll head to town in a few days, get you some better clothes, maybe find out if anyone's looking for you. Clara tensed, her smile fading. Ain't no one looking, I already know. He studied her a moment, then said, Then you can stay, as long as you need. And with that, the silence between them shifted, from something heavy to something safe. They didn't say much more that day. They didn't need to. Out in the wild land where trust came hard and life came harder, the Arizona wind blew cooler that evening, sweeping over the hills in gentle gusts that rattled the pine trees and sent the horses in the corral shifting restlessly. The sun was low, bathing the Boone Ranch in a rich orange light. A calm evening. Peaceful. But Clara Bell felt anything but peace. She stood in the barn, staring up at the wooden beams, twisting a piece of hay between her fingers. The smell of old leather, horse sweat, and dust was strangely comforting. It reminded her of the ranch she grew up on, before her mother passed, before her father turned into something unrecognizable. She wasn't used to safety. Her body didn't know how to rest. Even here, even with Elias Boone being nothing but decent, her nerves stayed tight like a bowstring. Her mind waited for yelling, for fists, for slammed doors, but they never came. Instead, Elias gave her space, gave her work to do, gave her silence that wasn't laced with threat. It was unsettling, and healing all at once. That night after supper, she saw the light from the barn still burning. It was well past dark. Elias was out there again. He hadn't said much all day. Then again, he never did. Curiosity nudged her, and she tiptoed outside. The desert night wrapped around her shoulders like a thin shawl, cool, dry, and full of whispers. She crept up to the barn doors and peered through the gap. Elias sat in the hay next to the empty stall his daughter's pony used to sleep in. A faded saddle rested on the rail. In his hands was something small, a doll. One arm torn, straw stuffing poking through a seam. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. Just sat with his shoulders hunched like a man carrying boulders on his back. His hat was off. His face looked older in the lantern light, creased and worn like sun-dried leather. Clara didn't move. She just watched. For the first time, she saw past the hard cowboy image, past the calloused hands and distant eyes. She saw the pain buried under his silence, the grief that never left, just shifted deeper inside. He was a man who had lost everything, and still got up every day to feed the animals, fix fences, and bring water in from the well. She understood that kind of ache. She lived with her own version of it every night. The next morning, she was already outside, brushing down the mare, when Elias stepped onto the porch. He held 2 mugs of coffee. Without a word, he handed one to her. "Didn't mean to snoop," she said after a long silence. "You didn't." She sipped the coffee, then glanced sideways at him. "Your daughter, what was her name?" He took a deep breath. "Abigail, we called her Abby. She was 5. She looked like your wife?" He gave the faintest smile. "Too much. Same curls, same laugh, same wild streak." Clara looked down at the brush in her hands. "I didn't mean to pry, I know what it's like, losing someone." Elias nodded slowly. "Don't reckon it ever stops hurting?" "No," she said. "But it stops controlling you. After a while." They stood there in silence, the horse shifting between them. Later that afternoon, Clara sat at the kitchen table, sorting through a box of old clothes Elias had pulled from the attic. They were Abby's, too small mostly, but a few things could be mended or refitted. Clara found a soft flannel shirt with a missing button and decided to fix it. Elias walked by, paused, and looked at her. "You sew?" "My ma taught me before. She passed. Said a girl who could sew and ride could survive anything." He gave a quiet chuckle. "Smart woman." She was. That was all they said. That evening, Clara made supper: beans, skillet bread, and stewed apples from a jar she found in the cellar. Elias said nothing while eating, but after his second helping, he finally spoke. "This is real fine." Clara smiled slightly. "You sound surprised." He looked at her with those tired eyes and said, "Didn't expect to have company again? Much less someone who cooks better than me." She blushed. "Didn't expect to be alive, so I guess we're even." That made him laugh, a short, rough sound, like an old engine kicking up after years of rest. It was the first time Clara had heard him laugh. That night, Clara returned to the barn, not to spy, just to sit. She brought the doll with the torn arm, cleaned and stitched. She left it where Elias had been sitting the night before. Then she went back to the house, curled up under the quilt, and for the first time in weeks, she slept without waking from nightmares. When Elias saw the doll the next morning, he didn't say anything. He just picked it up, turned it over in his hands, and placed it gently on the shelf above the stall. Later that day, he said to Clara, "There's a rodeo supply wagon coming through Dust Creek tomorrow. Might have boots your size." Clara's eyes widened. "I don't have any money." "You work," he said. "You earn your keep. That's more than enough." She smiled. "I'd like that. Haven't had a good pair in years." As they walked the pasture fence together that evening, Elias glanced at her and said something that stopped her in her tracks. "You remind me of Abby." Clara blinked. "I'm not trying to replace her." "I know," he said softly. "You don't have to." And in that moment, something shifted. The ghosts in the barn. The sun hadn't yet crested the hills when Elias tapped on Clara's door. "Up," he said through the wood. "If you're gonna ride, you gotta be out by first light." Clara groaned, pulling the quilt over her head. She was still sore from the day before, and her muscles ached in places she didn't even know she had muscles. But she wasn't about to complain, not after what Elias had done for her. By the time she emerged, Elias was already saddling the horses. The morning air was sharp and cold, and the sky was painted in shades of lavender and steel blue. Dew clung to the sagebrush, and the smell of horses and earth filled her lungs. Clara stretched her arms, brushed her teeth with water from the pump, and tied back her hair. "You ever ride a cutting horse?" Elias asked. "Just an old plow horse my uncle used to let me chase chickens with." Elias smirked. "We'll start slow then." The gelding he saddled for her was a chestnut mare named June, gentle-eyed but smart, with a bit of stubbornness. Clara liked her immediately. "You gotta earn her trust," Elias said. "She's picky about who holds the reins." Clara nodded, trying to mask the nerves that jumped in her chest. She climbed awkwardly into the saddle, fumbling with the stirrups. Elias mounted his own horse with the fluid grace of a man born to the saddle. He led them out past the corral and down a narrow trail winding through the low hills. "You ain't just here to ride," he said after a while. "You're gonna learn the land, learn the work." "I can work," she said quickly. "I don't mind it." "Didn't say you minded. Said you'd learn. Big difference." She didn't respond, just nodded and rode on. For the next few days, Elias taught her the rhythm of the ranch. She learned to mend fences, hammering in posts while swatting flies off her neck, clean tack and inspect saddle straps, her fingers, sticky with oil, check water lines, walking the dusty routes to the cattle troughs and reporting any cracks or dry spots, drive strays back into the herd, her whoops echoing across the canyon as she leaned into the gallop. The first time she lost control of her horse and got bucked halfway onto the ground, Elias didn't run to help. He stood there, arms crossed, and waited until she scrambled back up and got back on. "You fall off a horse," he said. "You get back on. That's ranch law." Clara dusted herself off, eyes blazing. "I know." Elias nodded once, approving. "Good." At night, Clara collapsed into bed, exhausted but satisfied. Her body was sore, blistered and sunburned, but she felt alive. She also began to sleep deeper. Her nightmares faded from vivid scenes to distant shadows. The house felt warmer now. The barn didn't feel haunted. And Elias had gone, from being the quiet stranger who rescued her to something more solid, like a stone in a river, unmoving, dependable. One evening, after repairing a section of fence near the canyon ridge, Clara stood staring across the horizon. The sky was ablaze, with sunset, deep reds and golds that stretched endlessly. Below, the valley looked like it went on forever. Elias joined her, wiping sweat from his brow. "You think you'll ever leave this place?" Clara asked. He shrugged. "Ain't much out there I want to see." She looked down. "What about me? You think I should leave?" He paused, then said, "That's your choice, ain't for me to say." "But if it was," she pressed. He looked at her then, really looked. "I think you've got grit, enough to make something out of nothing. You got a fire most folks don't. But whether you stay or go, it ought to be your call, not anyone else's." Her throat tightened, but she nodded. No one had ever said that to her before, that she had a choice, that she was allowed to choose her future. Later that night, as Clara was washing dishes, she said, "You ever think about taking someone on here? Like for good? A ranch hand or someone to help?" Elias leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Ain't had much reason to. Most folks don't stay long. And I didn't want company." She nodded slowly. "But you let me stay. You needed. And now?" He studied her a long time. "Now maybe I need it too." Clara didn't answer. She just smiled faintly and continued scrubbing the plate. The days passed in rhythm: work, ride, rest, repeat. Slowly, she stopped flinching when someone raised their voice in town. She stopped looking over her shoulder. She grew stronger, faster, tougher. She began to laugh again, sometimes at Elias's dry humor, sometimes just at the way the rooster chased his own shadow in the yard. She had forgotten what laughter felt like. It was a strange, ticklish thing in her chest, but she welcomed it. Elias saw the change too. The way her posture lifted, the way she carried herself, no longer small and closed off, but upright and steady. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. But he started setting an extra plate at the table without asking. Started keeping her coffee just the way she liked it. 2 spoonfuls of sugar, no cream. It was his way of saying, "You belong here." One night, after a full day of branding calves, Clara sat on the porch while Elias smoked a pipe. The stars were scattered thick across the sky. "You ever think about what it'd be like if your little girl grew up?" she asked gently. Elias didn't look at her. "All the time." "Would she have been like me?" He took a long breath. "No, she'd have been herself. But she might have been proud to have a sister like you." Clara's throat clenched, but she didn't cry. For the first time in her life, someone had claimed her, not in blood, but in bond. And on that quiet western night, under stars that didn't blink, the ranch was coming alive with the golden stir of mid-morning. Chickens scratched beneath the porch, the windmill groaned in the breeze, and the horses were already pawing the dry earth, ready to run. Clara Bell stood at the well pump, filling buckets, her shirt stuck to her back with sweat. She had dust on her cheeks, calluses forming on her hands, and sunburn across her nose, but she looked stronger than ever. She had almost forgotten what fear felt like. Until she heard the hoofbeats, not Elias's steady gait, not the uneven trot of a ranch hand. This was a government horse, military straight, crisp rhythm, too clean for a place like Boone's Ranch. Clara froze, hand still on the pump handle. Elias was already on the porch, hat low over his brow, one hand resting casually near the pistol on his hip. The rider came into view. Sheriff Josiah Harlan of Dust Creek, clean-shaven, gray vest, tin star gleaming on his chest like it belonged to God himself. Behind his mustache and charm was a man who had been turning blind eyes to cruelty for a long time. He reined in with a fake smile. "Morning, Boone." Elias didn't return the greeting. "You're a ways off your usual route." "Town's been talkin'," Harlan said, swinging down from his saddle. "Word is you're housing a girl, young, real young." Clara instinctively took a step back toward the barn, the shadows hiding her just enough. Elias didn't flinch. "She's not hiding. She's helping, and she's under my protection." Sheriff Harlan raised his eyebrows. "Now, I'm sure you mean well, but a girl that age staying alone with a man like you? It ain't exactly proper. Could raise questions." "I don't give a damn about questions," Elias said flatly. "She was left to die. I didn't ask for her, but I sure as hell wasn't about to leave her out there for the buzzards." The sheriff's voice took on a sharper tone. "Her pa says different." That made Clara's blood run cold. Elias stepped forward. "Jed Bell's no father. He tied her to a fence post and left her there. You come here to drag her back to that animal?" Harlan scratched his chin. "Hard to say what's true. Man's got rights. And unless the girl speaks for herself..." Clara stepped out of the barn then, shoulders back, chin high. Her voice was shaky but clear. "I'm not going back." The sheriff turned toward her, smug. "Miss Bell, we all make mistakes, but your father, he's willing to take you back. Says he was just drunk, lost his temper." Clara held up her arms. The scars from the rawhide still showed. "Does that look like someone who just lost his temper?" Harlan's eyes narrowed, but he kept his voice smooth. "Sometimes scars ain't what they seem." Elias stepped between them. "You've said your piece. She stays. And if you try to come through that gate again without a court order, you'll find I ain't as polite as I am today." It was a warning. Harlan didn't take kindly to being warned. He tipped his hat, but his jaw was tight. "I'll be back. And next time, I won't come alone." Then he mounted up and rode off, dust rising behind him like a storm. Inside, Clara's hands were shaking as she washed the breakfast plates. "He's going to stir things up," she whispered. "My father, he'll lie. He'll twist it. He always does." Elias leaned against the doorframe. "I figured as much. Maybe I should leave. Run again. Head west, work in a saloon, a mill, anything." Elias shook his head. "You run now. You'll run the rest of your life." "What if I'm not strong enough?" "You are. You've already proved it. Just by still being here." She set down the plate. "But I'm not your daughter. You owe me nothing." "That may be true," he said. "But I made a choice when I cut you down from that fence, and I'd make it again." Tears stung Clara's eyes. She looked away. Elias walked to the cabinet, pulled down his rifle, and began cleaning it. "We might have trouble soon. You sure you're ready for that?" Clara met his gaze, her voice steady. "I've lived through worse." The next day, word traveled through Dust Creek like wildfire. The sheriff had been humiliated. Elias Boone, the old war dog turned widower, had stood up to him. The saloon keeper whispered it to the blacksmith, who told his wife, who passed it to the preacher. Everyone had an opinion, but some didn't just gossip. Some remembered Jed Bell. They remembered his temper, his debts, the bruises his daughter never explained. They remembered the time he got arrested for fighting in the churchyard and how the sheriff let him go. One of those people was Ben Taylor, a ranch hand Clara had known as a little girl. He remembered seeing her cry behind the chapel once, remembered the yellowing bruise on her collarbone. And now, knowing she was alive and staying with Elias Boone, he started asking questions of his own. Back at the ranch, Elias and Clara spent the day preparing for trouble. She practiced loading, shells not just with speed but accuracy. "You ever shot at a man?" Elias asked. "No, but I've imagined it." He nodded. "It's different when it's real, even when they deserve it." Clara stared at the tin cans they'd set up as targets. "I hope I never have to find out. But if it comes down to it, I'll be ready," she said. "I won't go back, not alive." Elias said nothing, but pride flickered in his eyes. That night they ate by lantern light. No laughter, no stories, just quiet planning and watchful silence. The shadows were closing in. Dust Creek wasn't much of a town, but word traveled through it like wildfire in dry grass. By the end of the week, everyone from the blacksmith to the banker's widow had heard some version of the story. Elias Boone's hiding a girl out at his ranch. She's Jed Bell's daughter, the wild one. He rescued her? No, he kidnapped her. Boone's been crazy since his wife died. I heard Jed left her tied up like a calf. Well, if she was misbehaving, no, one really knew what to believe. But the town was buzzing, and the buzz was dangerous. At the saloon, Sheriff Harlan nursed a whiskey with a sour look. He didn't like being challenged, especially not by a man like Elias Boone, a man who used to ride with Union scouts, who could still outshoot most of the county, and who had nothing left to lose. "You really gonna let that girl hole up there like she owns the place?" the bartender asked. "She don't own nothing," Harlan growled. "And Boone don't either if I make the right call." A man stepped into the doorway. Dusty hat, sunburnt face. Jed Bell. He reeked of sour tobacco and stale sweat. But he spoke with the smooth charm of a man who knew how to manipulate a crowd. "I just want my daughter back," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Ain't no law says a man can't reclaim his kin." The room was silent. Harlan stood. "We'll get her." Meanwhile, Ben Taylor sat on the back porch of his mother's house staring at his boots. He'd heard the talk, but more importantly, he remembered Clara Bell, quiet, polite, always with a bruise she couldn't explain and a father whose smile never reached his eyes. He remembered once seeing Jed slap her in front of the post office. Hard. She had hit the ground like a dropped sack of flour, and no one did anything, not even the sheriff. Ben stood and saddled his horse. He rode toward Preacher Garrett's home, kicking up a trail of dust behind him. That evening, Elias and Clara were repairing a busted fence near the southern pasture. Clara worked fast, hammering nails and stretching wire like a seasoned ranch hand, but her eyes kept drifting toward the hills. "You're watching for him again," Elias said, not looking up. "I don't trust that sheriff, or my father. Neither do I." "You think they'll come at night?" He set down his post-hole digger and leaned on it. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll try to twist the town against us first. Use lies instead of bullets." "They're good at that," she muttered. "Then, we make sure the truth's louder." In Dust Creek, Preacher Garrett stood behind the pulpit at Wednesday service and surprised everyone. He cleared his throat and looked out at the small congregation, shopkeepers, ranch wives, miners, and mothers. "Y'all know I don't speak politics, but I'll speak truth." A long silence. "There's been talk in town about Elias Boone and Clara Bell. Talk about sin, about law. But I want to remind you of something the good book says. Defend the oppressed. Take up the cause of the fatherless." Murmurs swept the room. "I don't know all the details, but I do know that Elias Boone buried a wife and child. And I know that Jed Bell has a temper as wide as the canyon. Maybe it's time we stop listening to rumors and start paying attention to the scars." It wasn't thunderous, but it rippled. At the general store, the preacher's wife, Miss Lillian, leaned across the counter and whispered to the widow Thompson, "That girl Clara, she always had bruises." No one said a word back then. Now Elias takes her in and suddenly, "He's the problem?" The widow nodded slowly. "Maybe we got it backward." 2 nights later, Elias and Clara were feeding the horses when they heard a knock. Clara stiffened. Elias grabbed the rifle by the barn door, eyes narrowed. But it wasn't the sheriff. It was Ben Taylor. He took off his hat, his voice low. "I don't want trouble. Just need to talk." Elias motioned him forward. Ben looked at Clara, visibly uncomfortable. "You don't remember me, probably, but I remember you. We were in church together. You were always quiet." Clara nodded. "I remember you." Ben looked down, then back up. "I heard what your pa did. I believe you." That caught her off guard. "I came to tell you." Ben continued, "Some folks in town, Preacher Garrett, Miss Lillian, a few others, they're starting to see through the sheriff's games. They ain't all against you." Elias nodded. "Appreciate you coming. That took grit." Ben looked at Clara. "If things get worse, I'll testify. I'll say what I saw." She blinked, barely holding back tears. "Thank you." Ben tipped, his hat. "Ain't doing it for thanks, just tired of being silent." That night, Clara sat on the porch with Elias, a blanket over her legs and a warm mug in her hands. "You think we'll be safe?" "No," Elias said simply. "But we won't be alone either." Clara looked out over the hills, the stars spread like scattered dust above them. "I used to think no one would believe me," she said, "that I could scream and scream, and the world would keep walking by. And now? Now I think maybe someone finally heard me." Elias nodded. "And I'll be damned if I let him silence you again." The wind picked up. Coyotes howled in the far distance. But for the first time since she'd come to the Boone Ranch, it was just past midnight when the scent of smoke reached Clara's nose. She jolted awake, heart pounding. For a moment she thought it was one of her old nightmares. Her father yelling, fire in the distance, the world caving in. But this wasn't a dream. She jumped from the cot and rushed to the front door. The sky beyond the porch glowed orange, flickering like a lantern had been turned upside down. The barn was on fire. "Elias!" she screamed. The cabin door burst open. Elias, already pulling on his boots, shoved his rifle into her hands. "Stay low. Get the pump going." Clara ran toward the well, fear clawing up her throat. The dry grass crackled under her boots. The barn was engulfed, flames licking up the walls, the smell of scorched hay and wood searing her lungs. Elias grabbed a bucket and began flinging water, but it was useless. Too late. The fire had started on the inside. Someone had set it deliberately. "They lit it from the stall side," Elias shouted. "They knew what they were doing." She looked around wildly. "Where are the horses?" "Out grazing, thank God. Just the barn. But we can't save it." He yanked her back just as a rafter collapsed, sparks shooting like gunpowder. The old saddle, Abby's, was inside. The doll she'd repaired. Gone in seconds. Clara bit her lip hard enough to draw blood. They wanted to send a message. Elias's face was like stone. "Well, here's mine. I don't scare easy." By dawn, the barn was a black skeleton on the horizon. Ash coated the yard. Smoke still curled from the debris. Clara stood in the wreckage, the toe of her boot nudging a charred horseshoe. Everything had burned. Tools, gear, memories. But Elias had already set to work. "I'll need new beams," he muttered. "Some hinges. Nails." He kicked over a smoldering board. Damn near every piece. Clara stood beside him. "You're rebuilding?" "Of course I'm rebuilding," he snapped. Then his voice softened. "That's what we do out here." She stared at the pile of ashes. "They'll come back. Then we'll be ready." At the sheriff's office that afternoon, Elias slammed a scorched piece of wood down on Harlan's desk. "You gonna pretend this just happened?" Sheriff Harlan didn't blink. Could have been lightning. You sure your girl didn't knock over a lantern? Elias stepped forward, eyes sharp. There ain't been lightning in 2 weeks, and you and I both know who did it. Jed Bell, sitting in the corner of the office, gave a crooked grin. You accusing me, Boone? I'm saying you're a coward who sends fire when fists won't work. The sheriff raised a hand. Now, we've got no witnesses. Can't go around pointing fingers. Elias leaned down, voice low and deadly. If you're protecting him, Harlan, you better start praying. Because if anything else happens to that girl, you'll wish the fire got you first. Then he turned and walked out. Back at the ranch, Clara was packing supplies into saddlebags. Her hands shook, but her jaw was set. You going somewhere? Elias asked. She looked up. They're not going to stop. The sheriff's useless. I won't let them hurt you. He crossed his arms. You think running will save us? It might save you. I don't need saving. I need you here. Clara froze. He had never said that before. Never once. You're part of this place now, he said. They burn it down. We build it up. That's the deal. Tears welled in her eyes. What if they shoot next time? Elias pulled something from his belt. Her revolver, polished, cleaned, loaded. Then we shoot back. That evening, Ben Taylor rode out again. He wasn't alone this time. With him were Preacher Garrett, Miss Lillian, and 2 ranchers from the valley who'd quietly sided with Clara. They brought timber, nails, tools. We heard about the fire, Ben said. Figured you could use some help. Elias nodded once. I could. Clara stared at them. Why now? Miss Lillian placed a hand on her shoulder. Because you told the truth, and that made us brave. Under the stars, the frame of a new barn began to rise. Hammer strikes echoed into the hills. The scent of sawdust and sweat filled the air. And though the night was dark, it felt brighter than any in weeks. Clara worked until her arms gave out, then sat by the fence watching Elias drive the final post of the night. He looked exhausted, but something burned in his eyes. You all right? She asked. He looked over. No, but I'm alive. She smiled. Me too. And that? The air on the Boone Ranch was still, too still. No birdsong, no wind through the sagebrush. Just the creak of the new barn frame and the distant lowing of cattle. A storm was building, not in the sky but in town, in hearts, in grudges. Elias knew it. He stood on the porch that morning with a cup of black coffee and a loaded Winchester rifle leaning by the door. Clara was inside, rolling cartridges and sharpening her focus. Her hands didn't shake anymore, not like they used to. She'd become a different girl, not broken, not afraid, just ready. At the sheriff's office in Dust Creek, Jed Bell was pacing, like a caged wolf. She's out there twisting folks against me, he snapped. Boone's setting her up like some kind of frontier saint. She's mine, Josiah. I want her back. Sheriff Harlan sat calmly, boots up on the desk. He'd been watching the town shift. Folks that used to nod and look away now stared straight through him. The preacher's sermon, the barn fire, it was changing people, weakening his grip. Then go get her, Harlan said coldly. But if you want my badge in it, I'll need a court order, Jed Bell growled. You said you'd help. I said I'd look the other way. Jed turned for the door. Then I'll do it my way. Make sure you don't miss. Back at the ranch, Clara was brushing June, her mare, when Elias called out from the porch. Company. She looked up. Dust was rising at the ridge. 4 riders. Jed Bell led them, a long-barreled rifle slung over his shoulder and hatred in his eyes. The others, drunk cousins, hired hands, the kind of men who shot first and ran second, trailed close behind. Clara's stomach tightened. Her fingers closed around the pistol on her hip. Elias didn't flinch. He stepped down the porch with the rifle in hand, calm as a stone. Jed reined in just 20 feet from the gate. You've got something of mine, he snarled. Elias shook his head. She's not property. Jed spit in the dirt. She's my blood. And blood don't give you ownership, especially not after what you did. She's a liar. She's got scars. Then hand her over and no one gets hurt. Elias lifted the rifle halfway. You aim to cross that gate. You better say your prayers first. The hired men hesitated. Jed didn't, but Clara stepped forward. She walked right past Elias, pistol drawn, standing tall at the center of the yard. You want me, Daddy? She called. Then come and try. But you ain't dragging me nowhere again. Not tied, not silent, not ever. Jed froze. The sun caught her eyes, sharp and shining. You ain't the man I was scared of anymore, she continued. You're just a drunk with a bruised ego and no one left to beat. Elias glanced at her, surprised but proud. Jed snarled, raising his rifle. Boom. A single gunshot cracked the morning air. But it wasn't Elias or Clara who fired. It was Ben Taylor, rifle in hand, from the far ridge near the barn. The shot had hit the dirt just inches from Jed's boot. A warning. Then came another voice. Drop it, Bell, shouted Preacher Garrett, rifle steady. Behind him stood half a dozen townsfolk, men and women, farmers, a shopkeeper, even Miss Lillian, holding a shotgun. One by one, they stepped out from the tree line surrounding the ranch. Elias looked around, amazed. Clara whispered, They came. Jed Bell looked from one face to another. His hand trembled on his rifle. Y'all gonna side with a girl over her father? He bellowed. Miss Lillian replied, We're siding with truth, and if that burns your pride, maybe it oughta. The men behind Jed backed away. Clara stepped closer. You can walk away now. But if you raise that gun again, it'll be the last thing you ever do. For a long, tense moment, nothing moved. Then Jed Bell turned his horse and spat in the dirt again. This ain't over. You're right, Clara said. It's just starting. And I don't need your name anymore. He glared one last time. Then he and his men turned and rode off. After they disappeared, the yard exploded with exhaled breath. Miss Lillian dropped her shotgun, hands shaking. Ben came riding in from the ridge. Thought you might need some backup. Preacher Garrett chuckled. She didn't. Elias turned to Clara. You didn't hesitate. I was tired of being afraid. He smiled, genuinely, the first time in months. You were braver than me. They stood together in the dusty yard, ringed by people who had once turned their backs but now stood firm behind them. Clara looked around, heart pounding. For the first time in her life, she had stood up to the man who broke her, and he blinked first. That night, Elias lit a fire in the pit beside the new barn frame. Clara sat beside him, holding a mug of hot coffee and staring at the sky. You reckon he'll come back? She asked. Maybe. But next time he won't find you alone. She nodded, quiet. Then Elias reached into a sack and pulled out something, wrapped in cloth. What's this? He handed it to her. Inside was a new saddle horn, carved with the initials, CB. It's for June, he said. Figure it's time you had something that's yours. Clara blinked hard. Thank you. Elias looked at her and with a quiet voice said, You're family now. Not by blood. By choice. She smiled, her eyes misting. I'll ride proud. And under the stars, beside the fire and the frame of a rising barn, Clara Bell knew. She had claimed her name. She had claimed. The desert winds had shifted. Summer was loosening its grip on Dust Creek, and the heat gave way to cool, steady days perfect for rebuilding. The barn, once black in ruins, was nearly whole again. Its new frame stood proud against the open sky, just like the girl who now called this place home. Clara Bell had changed. The scars on her arms remained, but she no longer hid them. They were proof of survival, not shame. Her eyes, once wary and skittish, now met every glance head-on, and she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had chosen to stay instead of run. Elias watched her from the porch as she led the horses, to pasture, boots worn, braid swinging behind her shoulder. She's got her mother's strength, he murmured. Then caught himself. He meant Abby's mother, his wife. Clara wasn't related by blood, but after all they'd endured together, family had taken on a new meaning. That evening, Elias brought out a hammer and an old plank. Clara sat beside him, her curiosity sparked. "What's that?" "Gate sign," he said. "Figure this place ought to have a name again." She watched as he carved slow, careful letters into the wood. Her eyes widened when he passed her the chisel. It had written, Bell and Boone Ranch. Clara stared at the letters. "You sure?" she asked softly. "That name, Bell, it's still my father's." Elias nodded. "It ain't about who gave it to you. It's about what you make of it." She thought for a moment, then smiled. "Then I'll carve it deeper." She took the chisel and began carving each line with slow, deliberate strokes. When it was done, Elias nailed it to the gate. The two of them stood there in silence, staring. "At it, Bell and Boone," she whispered. "Sounds like a team." "We are," he said. The next day, Sheriff Harlan rode out again, not with a gun, but with paper. "Ain't here to cause trouble," he said, holding up a court summons. "Jed Bell filed with the state. He wants a hearing." Elias took the paper, read it. His jaw tightened. "Reckon he's trying the legal route now," the sheriff added. "Wants to contest custody, claims you brainwashed the girl." Clara laughed bitterly. "He never cared about custody before, just control." Harlan avoided her eyes. "State judge'll be passing through in a week. You'll both need to be there." Clara took the summons and folded it carefully. "We'll be ready." The next few days passed in preparation, but not just for court. Clara had plans. "I want to brand the cattle," she told Elias. "Make it official. Show folks I'm not just some charity case living off your goodwill." He looked at her proudly. "You've got the grit for it." They spent the day designing the brand, a simple CB over a crescent moon for Clara Bell. The moon was her idea. "Because I was at my lowest in the dark," she explained. "But that's when I changed." They branded the first calf together. Clara's hands didn't shake. The hiss of hot iron against hide didn't faze her. It was hers now, this ranch, this life, this story. That Sunday, Preacher Garrett gave a sermon titled, Justice in the Wilderness. It wasn't subtle. "The Lord doesn't measure a man by blood," he said. "He measures him by the way he treats the lost, the wounded, and the broken." Clara sat in the back, her hat low over her brow, but everyone saw her. They knew who he was talking about. After the service, Miss Lillian pulled her aside. "You've become someone we're proud of," she said. Clara blinked. "I didn't think anyone ever noticed me before." "We notice now." Later that evening, Elias brought out a leather-bound ledger. It was dusty and old, the original ranch registry. "I want you to sign it," he said. She frowned. "But I don't. You've earned your place here, not as a hand, as a partner." She hesitated only a moment, then dipped the quill and scrawled her name. Clara Bell Boone. Elias looked at her, one eyebrow raised. She grinned. "I added yours too." In town, word spread quickly. Some scoffed, some sneered, but others came forward. Ranchers offered trade. Blacksmiths gave discounts. Mothers whispered to their daughters, "That girl, she's tough as boot leather." Clara walked through Dust Creek with her head high, the townspeople tipping their hats as she passed. No longer pitied, no longer ignored. On the final night, before the court hearing, Clara sat beside the corral watching the moon rise. "You scared?" Elias asked. "Little bit," she admitted. "But I've stood in front of worse than a judge." Elias lit his pipe. "And you've got more folks behind you now than he ever will." She nodded, then pulled out a small box from her pocket. "What's that?" She opened it. Inside was a silver brooch, tarnished but beautiful. "My ma's. I kept it hidden when he'd get angry. Thought he might take it. I think she'd want me to wear it tomorrow." Elias looked away, blinking. "Then you'd better." The ranch was quiet that night, but a storm of truth was gathering. Tomorrow Clara Bell would stand not just against her father, but for herself. She had the name. She had the land. She had a future. The Dust Creek Courthouse was barely more than a two-room building near the edge of town. Its windows were cracked, and the flag above the porch flapped in the wind like it was trying to escape the place entirely. But for Clara Bell, it felt like the center of the world. She stood just outside the doors, hands clenched at her sides. She wore her mother's brooch pinned to a plain dress. Her hair was tied back, neat and proud. And though her boots were dusty, her spine was straight as a fence post. Elias stood beside her, calm and quiet. "You ready?" he asked. "No," she said honestly. "But I'll go in anyway." He smiled faintly. "That's what makes you ready." Inside, the pews were filled with townsfolk, curious faces and quiet whispers. On one side of the room sat Jed Bell, his bruised pride tucked into a borrowed suit. Sheriff Harlan was behind him, arms folded. On the other side sat Ben Taylor, Preacher Garrett, Miss Lillian, and a few other brave souls who had watched Clara grow, not always well, not always safe, but grow nonetheless. The traveling judge, a wiry man named Judge Hammond, banged the gavel. "This hearing concerns guardianship and custody of Miss Clara Bell, age 16. Petitioner Jed Bell, respondent Elias Boone. Miss Bell has requested to speak on her own behalf." The judge looked over his spectacles. "Is that right, miss?" Clara stood. Her voice didn't tremble. "Yes, sir. I've got a lot to say." Jed Bell was the first to speak. "She's my daughter," he barked. "I raised her. I fed her. Sure, I had hard times, but what man hasn't? Boone's poisoned her against me. She's a child, Your Honor. What does she know about life on her own?" Clara watched him speak and realized something surprising. He was small. Smaller than she remembered, smaller than the monster she'd battled in her nightmares. When it was her turn, she stepped to the front of the room and turned to face the judge and the town. "My name is Clara Bell," she began. "But I don't carry that name for the man who gave it to me. I carry it for the woman who wore it with dignity, and for myself." A hush fell. "I was tied to a fence and left to die," she continued. "That's not a metaphor. That's what my father did to me. He said I was rebellious, that I spoke back. But what I said was no more." Her voice never wavered. "I've worked that ranch with Elias Boone every day since he cut me down. I've rebuilt barns, branded calves, hauled feed, not because I had to, but because I chose to. Because, for the first time in my life, someone gave me a choice." She looked directly at her father now. "You don't own me. Not anymore." Jed Bell started to rise, red-faced, but the judge raised a hand. "Mr. Bell, one more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt." He sat down hard. Judge Hammond took his time. He asked Elias questions about his finances, about the ranch, about his past. He asked Clara about her plans. "I want to run the ranch," she said. "I want to earn everything I keep. And I already am." He asked the sheriff if he had any evidence that Elias posed a threat. Harlan hesitated, then shook his head. "No, sir, just rumors." The judge raised his brows. "Well, the law don't run on rumors." Finally, after what felt like an hour of silence, the judge stood. "In 30 years of riding this circuit, I've seen a lot of girls break under pressure. I've seen a lot of men use the law to mask cruelty." He looked down at Clara. "But I've rarely seen someone fight so hard for herself. You don't need a guardian, Miss Bell. You need a community. And it seems you've finally got one." He looked at Elias. "Mr. Boone, I hereby grant you full guardianship until Miss Bell turns 18. After that, she'll be free to live as she chooses. I expect you'll keep teaching her how to stand tall." Elias nodded once. "Yes, sir." The gavel came down. Case closed. Outside, the town had gathered in clusters. When Clara stepped through the door, the crowd parted for her like the sea. Ben Taylor walked up with a grin. "You did it." "No," she said, looking at Elias, then the others. "We did it." Even Miss Lillian was teary-eyed. "Your mother would be proud." Clara smiled. "I think I finally am too." That night at the ranch, a celebration of sorts. They roasted meat, told stories, and passed around a jug of cider. The townsfolk who had once whispered behind her back Now toasted to her name, Elias lifted a glass. To Clara Bell Boone, the toughest dam rancher in Dust Creek. The cheers echoed into the hills. Later, as the fire burned low, Clara stood at the gate and traced the letters again. Bell and Boone. The name meant something now, not because it was given to her, but because she had earned it. And somewhere deep in the desert night, the wind carried the sound of freedom, not in gunshots, not in screams, but in the soft, steady